and welcome to another episode of Law and Order on Trust Television, a show that educates you on your rights and ways to seek redress if these rights are violated. This show also enlightens you on your responsibilities, as they say, where your right stops, another person's rights begin. So in other words, this show teaches you how to differentiate between the two. My name is Martia Umar, and of course, today we're talking about women's rights. Women's rights are fundamental human rights that were enshrined by the United Nations for every human being on the planet. And this right includes all the fundamental human rights, like I mentioned in the beginning. So have you ever heard of the saying, women's rights are human rights? Yes, maybe that's why we have all of the fundamental human rights being enshrined in the Constitution, so women, regardless of the gender right now, can enjoy this right. Yet, almost everywhere around the world, women and girls are still denied their rights simply because of their gender. Hence, our topic of discussion on the program today, women's rights, upholding the rights of women in Nigeria. And just to mention, March 8th, every year is marked as International Women's Day, and the theme for this year is gender equality for sustainable tomorrow. But just before the commemoration of the day, scores of Nigerian women descended on the National Assembly to demand for their rights. Take a look. Among a series of bills rejected by the National Assembly in its constitutional amendments are some that are very important to Nigerian women. This development prompted scores of them to descend on the National Assembly complex in Abuja in protest. They are accusing the lawmakers of choosing to deny women the opportunity of inclusion and representation in governance by voting against the bills. Of the 68 legislations, about 5 bills sought to promote more opportunities for women in political parties, governance, and the society at large.
And we're going for leadership meeting. From here, I'm going to go to the leadership and I will pass your message on to the Senate President. Okay. And I will urge him to come and respond to you personally. Thank you.
We appreciate you. 5 votes to Senator Abaribe.
One of the bills sought to grant citizenship to foreign-born husbands of Nigerian women. Another bill sought to allocate 35% of political positions based on appointment to women. Another legislation sought to create special seats for women in national and state assemblies.
We are here today this morning as groups of women. We have almost 20 different groups and more, with their members are here. I know that AWBN has even up to 10, so 20 is actually an underrepresentation. So we have about 50 women groups here. We're here, and this is the first step that we are taking to demand that the wrong that was done to Nigerian women should be redressed. What we saw yesterday is a manifestation of the historical injustices that have been affecting the participation and voice of Nigerian women. Yesterday, we realized that people who are representing us are not representing the 50% of the population. Yes. That they were actually just representing themselves. Conversation that has to do with their own resource or revenue were issues that they prioritized. But the conversation dealing with Nigerian people, Nigerian women, or young people were not prioritized.
But the question is, why were these bills rejected? And from what we saw, it seems the women are not really happy about the rejection of these bills. So I'd like to say welcome back again to the show. So, about a lot of things happening there, about women's rights in the country. But to discuss all of this, we are being joined by two guests. This is the first time I'm having two women on the show. And don't take it the wrong way. It's not a woman's affair, or should I say it's a woman's affair? Because it's a woman's affair right now, because this has to do with women, and we are all women in the studio. So thank you so much for being here. We have, should I say, the lawyers like the barrister and the esquire at the end. So just give me the liberty, my lords. Give me the liberty so I can start whichever one I want. Okay, so we have Chioma Joy Orakwe.
Yeah.
She is a human rights activist, a woman's activist, and also a lawyer. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
All right, and we also have a women's rights activist and a legal practitioner, lawyer, Joy Favor Ime Esquire. Should I put that at the end?
Well, you don't have to, but it's fine. You can do without it.
All right, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having us.
It's a women's affair. I would say that categorically. So nobody has to jail me for that.
Yeah.
So I have two lawyers here so they can back me up. So no, it's obvious that the women are not happy. And like we talked about in the beginning, the women's rights are rights that have been enshrined in the Constitution. Women's rights are human rights. So what do we say about women's rights in Nigeria? I would like to use the cliche, how far so far? How would you rate the progress we've made so far as regards women's rights in the country?
I would say that the progress we've made is pretty slow and very stagnant. It's not moving a lot, but I would not disagree or not recognize that the little steps that have been made by people pushing out conversations about women is more prominent, but we can do better. We're in a different generation now. We're in 2022. The conversation cannot be as it was 50 years ago. The conversation cannot be, the conversations we were supposed to be having now are not the conversations that we're supposed to be having now. These are conversations that should have been dealt with in time past, and we should have progressively moved to another stage of the ladder when we're talking about women's involvement in politics and women's rights in general. So when you go back to your question, how do you want me to expatiate on this further?
Before now, the right to life, the right to education, the right to equal opportunity. Equal opportunity has been, in court. We've not been given what we deserve in the country, as most women would say. What would you say to that?
This is definitely true. It's not up for debate or argument. This is a reality that women face in Nigeria. If we are talking about the 10 million out of school children, we have over 60%, which signifies as women and young girls rather. So women's rights are not upheld in Nigeria, and that we know for sure. But the question, so to me, right, I like to look at things through a lens of the grassroots problem. What is the problem? Why are women's rights not upheld? When the Constitution, we run a democracy right here. And if we're talking about the rule of law literally tells us that everybody, it did not say every man, it did not say every woman, it says everybody, and everybody means every human being, both gender, is equal under the law. So the question that sits with me most of the time is that why is this not being implemented? And it's simple. We have various mitigating issues, rather, we have various influencing issues in this talk about women's rights. And I wouldn't want to put that in quote actually because of the way my hands went. But but when we speak, it's something that is personal when you think about it. It's something
How
that
personal?
It's very personal because it is my fundamental human right.
Yep.
It's my fundamental human right to vote, right? It's my fundamental human right to want to participate in politics and decisions that affect me as a human being. So when that right is being impeded on, it begs the question as to what sort of democracy are we running as a people? Is there a category whereby men are now considered as the people that are valued as people that have rights in the country, right? So so I sit down. It's funny because we have a constitution that lays all of this down, right? We have rules and establishments that say women are supposed to be involved, but in actual practicalities, that's not true.
Okay, Barrister Favor, the constitutional amendment, that's what led to the protest.
That's correct.
Of the 68 legislations that were supposed to be passed, 5 out of that legislation concerned women, and none of them were passed.
Yeah.
So, can we categorically spell out some of these rights that are supposed to be enjoyed by women in the country?
Yes, definitely. I think one of them that was contained in the bill is, I think this relates to 35% of political participation. So in the ministries and government being specifically carved out for women. And that was just thrown under the carpet. You know, talk about women with foreign husbands having the same rights that men have currently to confer that Nigerian citizenship on their husbands. That was also thrown under the carpet. Talk about the Gender and Equality Rights Bill that spoke extensively about the need to have equality, the need for government, for the private sector, for the educational sector, you know, for the community, meaning the families, to try and stir our children away from the gender stereotypes that keep infiltrating our minds and determining the way we do things. Those are some of the very vital bills and provisions that were put forward by women before the National Assembly. And today, the years of hard work, the years of advocacy has just been thrown away like nothing was done. I think this is just representative of the fact that as a nation, we are deprioritizing women. We're deprioritizing ourselves, because this is not just about women. This is about equality across board, in the political sector, in business, in the corporate world. And it's just a shame, because are we truly, like she said, are we truly running a democracy? What reputation are we creating for ourselves in the international community? We're seeing this permeate itself.
One of the things that caught my attention was the fact that women's rights are human rights.
Correct.
And then when you talk about human rights, there is the right to vote and be voted for. Now the women are asking for, you know, positions, certain positions in the National Assembly or in power or political sphere, so to speak. So what's now the difference, you know, vote and be voted for? Can we have women who are qualified come out to seek votes from the women, just like the men do? Is there any, let's say, difference from what we have in the Constitution and what the women are proposing? Is there any contrast, rather?
At the moment, the Constitution generally says you should have, you know, the freedom of dignity, you know, education and all of that, you know, right to participate in governance. Now, the interesting thing that I want to point out is there's Chapter 2 of the Constitution, which contains justiciable rights. There's Chapter 4 that constitutes human rights. So I believe in Chapter 2, that's where it talks about, you know, the government should allow the entirety, nobody should be discriminated against, and everybody should be a part of political participation. But I think what women are trying to nail to the ground is, you guys, the Constitution is saying X, but then there is no real implementation. It's like a toothless bulldog, right? You have the Nigerian gender policy, which I believe the Federal Executive Council updated last week. But then put a law in place that we can implement and enforce. Give us something that we can hold by the hand and say, I want to participate. I have registered. I am competent. There has to be a system that works. So I think the Constitution is there quite all right. But what the women are currently advocating for is taking it a step further.
So this step further, does it mean that the step further is going to the National Assembly, proposing these bills, they have to be passed, and then we have implementation of these bills going on. But right now, there's been a lot of advocacy before the protest, before the International Women's Day, of course, which we will all mark this year, 2022, which is all talking about equality, gender equality, and sustainable, I would say sustainable development goal if you use the other words. So now we have all of the advocacy, we have all of the programs here and there to promote human rights. to promote women's rights
Yes.
and the girl child. But we still have these lapses. Is it the fault of the government? Is it the fault of the media? Is it the fault of maybe Nigerian women? Why are we still where we are right now as relates to upholding the rights of women in Nigeria?
I think the most important thing at first is that we need to acknowledge where we've come from as a people.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we have to understand that women have been, in long history, handed the shorthand of the stick, right? When it comes to, it's just in recent years, 100 or 150 years, that women gained a certain right to vote and participate in certain things. And it's fascinating to me that when the conversation of women getting involved or women's rights or women being involved in any sort of leadership position or any sort of authority position, right? It's a conversation of why are we talking a lot about it, right? So, can I cut short?
Yes, you cannot caution, but you can go ahead. I know you're being overwhelmed right now because this is getting to you. Like there's so much going on in the society, and we just need to speak up. So this is an opportunity. So we have to speak up.
Actually, can you
Okay,
repeat the question?
so do you want to take?
Yeah,
or-
of course. I mean, in my opinion, there's so many moving parts. I don't think it is a government thing alone. It's not a women thing alone. It's not. There's so many moving parts, and I think the first point that Chema was just highlighting is, as women, we have a role to play. That's the one part where,
Okay.
for example, let's compare. You know, the voices that came together during the NSAS protest, vis-a-vis the voices that came together in relation to this. You know, there's a stark difference in the volume. You know, so I think that's the first thing. Women need to come together, and we need to speak a lot more about this. And it's probably because we don't realize that it actually affects us. Or maybe we haven't been in a situation where we experience that direct discrimination. But the question is, do we wait until our children, until the girl child, until our sisters experience that direct discrimination before we speak up in volume? That's one. On the government side of things, I mean, what just happened in terms of the 5 bills being pushed to the side is obvious that, you know, these people in the position of power are not taking us seriously. They're the gatekeepers, and they're not letting us in. For what reason? What exactly are you hoarding?
Yes.
You know, so there are so many parts to it. And then there's also the historical part that she just mentioned, which is incredibly important. We're coming from, years and decades and centuries of, you know, a time, essentially, where women were just nothing. At a point, women were properties. There are movies that have put this into picture. 12 Years a Slave. You know, women were properties.
Women have been considered secondary citizens.
Exactly.
If we look back into history, we've seen that this has been a long struggle, rather. So the conversation of women having rights and women seen as human beings, because there was a time that women were only considered as equal as animals, right? Or secondary as slaves, right? Before that upgraded to, okay, she's a woman, she's human being, but she doesn't have certain rights. She is supposed to be under a man. She is supposed to listen to rules and regulations that follow. So she's not supposed to be on that equal placeholder with men. And now the conversation is that we are women, we are equal in rights. We're human beings. So this is the first thing I try to say. Before I'm a woman, I'm a human being. And when we have the fundamental human rights, it didn't say fundamental men's rights, fundamental women's rights. It says fundamental human rights. So the first recognition is I'm a human being. And human being means both male and both female, right? In our present day term. So that is something that first has to be recognized. And we have not, and this is something I would like to put out there, we've not started yet.
We haven't started
If people feel like the voices, because 100 years, it's not going to take 100 years to undo the damage that has been done for thousands of years. If people feel like women are speaking of, this is just only the beginning. Women are going to speak more because we have to get to the root of the problem. Recognize me first as a human being deserving of rights.
Yeah.
That's what you see me as. Don't look at me and see me as I am a woman, therefore I do not have rights. Look at me as a human being, and then a woman as a human being. Right? An African woman as a human being. And that's where the differentiation starts coming. But first, we have to go to the roots. I'm a human being. I'm deserving of rights. So when we also talk about rights, we have people sitting in positions, making decisions for half the population of women the population of the country, which is
more
women.
than half,
more than half the population
Yes.
of the country. How do you make decision for a gender that you're not in? How can you actively relate to a gender that you do not go through the process as? As a man, your experiences are different for you as I am a woman. I will be in a better position, a better sit to tell you that this is the best laws that will help me. These are the laws that you can put in place that will influence me, right? So it's funny. I find it very funny that people, I wouldn't say people, that a certain group of people, human beings, right, will sit in power and dictate to another certain group of human beings that these are the laws that should influence you and these are the laws that should not influence you. I think that's highly discriminatory. I think that our human rights are being infringed on a daily. I believe strongly that now more than ever, it beckons for a lot of women to come out, to recognize that this, like Favor rightly said, to recognize that this is not just about. So when we talk about equality, let's talk about the
equity.
Equality, actually, that's what the International Women's Day is about, right?
Yeah.
Equality. I wonder if people use the dictionary, you know, because when a term comes to me, and every time I have a conversation with people, I actually go to the dictionary every single time to ensure that the definition has not changed. And when equality is being spoken about, it's spoken about in status, it's spoken about in rights and opportunities. It's not spoken about in frivolities as to domestic conversations. There's that which is a social problem, an immorality problem. But when you're talking about the rights of a person, it is not a meager conversation. It is not a minority conversation. It is a must-heard conversation. It's a conversation that needs to be had now. It's a conversation that needs to be influenced now. Because you do not want a situation where your daughter is telling you, I want to be a governor, and you're literally looking at her and laughing. Because that's what most is culture. It starts from upbringing. You want to be a what? Go and look for something else to do. It's the conversation of, you can't be a president, you can't be a governor, but what's the precedent? There's none.
Okay, that reminds me, Favor, obviously from what we've talked about now, the legislations on ground supporting women's rights is not just enough. We have the Violence Against Persons Act, and implementation, you know, of course, is a problem in this country. We have the Penal Code, we have other legislations. Now that all of these legislations are not really working in women's favor in Nigeria, obviously you did, Joy did say that we need to improve. She cannot just throw away some of the improvements we've made over the years as a country. But what's the way forward? Maybe speaking from a legal perspective now, of course, we've been talking from the legal perspective, just to buttress more, if there's a problem, there's definitely a solution or a probable solution. So what do you think is the way forward for the Nigerian women as regards their rights?
I think that's a very difficult question to answer, to be honest, because this is a multifaceted issue, right? You've just rightly mentioned that there are pockets of laws around that have provisions that would chip in something about the woman, right? But we don't necessarily have any legislation that is dedicated to spelling out rights of women and just equality, gender equality generally across board. And that's very important, because when you have pockets of legislation that just have provisions and all of that, it doesn't drive the message home. It's not taken as seriously as it should be. So this is an issue that is serious enough to warrant a legislation in and of itself. So for me, that's something that is important. Another thing, like you said, that comes to mind is enforcement. But the good thing about our system is we have something called the Fundamental Rights Enforcement Procedure Rules.
Okay.
So if your rights are being infringed upon, Section 42 is what actually borders on discrimination. That's in the Constitution. You can actually go to the court based on those rules and get a judgment pretty quickly, actually. I know that generally the consensus and the reality is our judicial system is extremely slow. I understand that. But thankfully, there are actually a couple of civil procedure rules in place. For example, like I said, the Fundamental Rights, FREP, that's what it's called. So when you actually have any sort of infringement, you could go to the courts and seek redress based on those rules, and the courts will hear you as quickly as possible. The court is mandated, in fact, to do that. So
Let's just hope that it doesn't end there.
it won't.
It can't. It can't.
Not for one life.
There's something I say, a word after a word is power. You have to keep, words are very living things and they're powerful. So you do not stop speaking about it.
Yeah.
A word after a word. How do laws come into place?
Yeah.
A word after a word, I guess.
Yeah, a word after a word.
Literally.
You have to keep talking about it. And
Exactly.
then you would have, so people say, okay, women are making too much noise about this. No, we've not started, as I've been repeating since we've started this conversation. But a word after a word is something significant. Do not stop talking about it in your small circles. So apart from us having this legal backing, right, in place, which is very important, it also goes, there's something that needs to be spoken about for these things to actually have the effect that it needs. A solution moving forward is to also garner a majority women, the majority of women to come out in masses, to have women speak about these things. So it's one thing to have a legislation that women do not believe that they're entitled to, right? Because it goes down to culture. And it's another thing to have a legislation that women believe is their right. You have to believe that you have a right to something. If you do not know that you have a right to something, there's no, a lot of us do not know as much rights that we have, like rights to bail and the bail processes. We do not know all of those things. But it's one thing about putting this in place, and one thing that women are acknowledging that this is a right that they have and influencing that right. So what I'd say is women should keep talking about it. We should go out there, I myself, every single person in your small circles, speak about it, keep yourself educated about it. And that way we'll be able to change the laws.
A word after word obviously is very, very important, and we should all get out there and continue to speak about it. The whole month of March is for the women to amplify our voice and to seek that right, the enforcement of our fundamental human rights as a people. And that's what happened when you have two lawyers, beautiful lawyers in the studio talking about women's rights. And that's how we end the show today. Thank you so much for being here, Barrister Favor and Barrister Choma. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And it's a close on the program. It's International Women's Day, and this runs through the month of March. So it's happy International Women's Day to every woman out there, including the he for she. And and we'll continue to talk about women's rights and more advocacy and more implementation of this right. Thank you so much for being a part of the show. Like I said, ignorance of the law is not an excuse. So keep educating yourself about this rights, and where you need to seek redress, please ask for help. Get a lawyer if it's very, very necessary. My name is Martia Umar. I'll see you next week as we'll be talking about more human rights issues and how we can seek redress surrounding any of these human rights issues.